she was a high-functioning woman. She wanted to get rid of her kids, and then she set up this defense in her attempted suicide. She admitted that she might have held back about the auditory hallucinations because she didn't want to be seen as so crazy that her children would be taken away. That was mainly their argument, that she was a conniving, planning woman who wanted to get rid of her kids and then thought she could get away with it by saying she was crazy. And by the way, I don't think it's a good argument, because if they decide she's not guilty by reason of insanity, like the second jury did in the Andrea Yates case, she's not going to walk free. So it's not a get out of jail free card. You might get out of jail, but you're going into a locked institution.
So as we enter the 5th week of the Lindsay Clancy trial, we expect to hear closing arguments from the prosecution, who has been arguing that Lindsay deliberately killed her 3 children in January of 2023. And we'll also hear from the defense, who has been arguing that Lindsay was suffering from undiagnosed postpartum psychosis at the time of the killings.
Massachusetts still goes by the defense that was actually invented in the UK, the McNaughton defense. The person had to not know right from wrong, or be incapable of conforming their behavior to the standards of society. Either one can qualify them as insane. And in Massachusetts, what some people say is insane is that the burden isn't on the defendant and their lawyer to prove the insanity, but the burden is actually on the prosecution, in this case, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to prove that she was capable of having criminal intent and therefore was not criminally insane.
And could you break down a little bit of what exactly they're trying to prove in Lindsay Clancy's case?
What the defense is trying to prove is that even though she was functional as a maternity and delivery nurse, and she had friends and she was taking care of her kids, sometimes when you have behaviors like running a house or doing your job, charting for nursing, things you've done a lot of the time, you can still do it sort of by rote. And no insanity or unusual behavior shows. She admitted to being depressed to some people that she didn't know that well. It's not really appropriate to bring all your problems to work. But at the same time, they said that she had so much planning, that she was Googling how to kill, although that was not admitted as evidence, that she also was Googling hallucinations, which the defense then took and said, well, obviously she told doctors she was hearing voices before she did the dirty act. So it must have been a sign that she really did have hallucinations, that she didn't make it up on the spot. But the prosecution is trying to show she planned it. She was a high-functioning woman. She wanted to get rid of her kids, and then she set up this defense in her attempted suicide. Whether she meant to hurt herself or not, she did dive out the window, a second-floor window, head first. So that's hard to say that she meant to just scrape herself up a little bit with knives or razor blades. They still say that she was functioning enough that she knew that what she was doing was wrong, and she could have conformed her behavior to the needs of society, that she planned it too well. That's basically their argument in a nutshell.
And before we dive into a bit about what the prosecution is discussing, obviously you already mentioned those Google searches, and I just want to say for a little clarity, I believe it was that she heard the voice, kind of commanding her to kill her children on the day of, on January 24th, 2023, as opposed to beforehand.
Yes, the command hallucination, the delusion, the hallucination inference, a male voice telling her to kill her children and kill herself. That she claimed came out when she called her husband and said that happened immediately before I did what I did. However, she had sought help on numerous occasions. She did. It's not clear whether she told psychiatrists she was hearing voices then. She said she was very depressed. She was afraid she couldn't care for her children. and she admitted that she might have held back about the auditory hallucinations because she didn't want to be seen as so crazy that her children would be taken away. That would have prevented her had she heard any of these command hallucinations. But she did try to get help, inpatient and outpatient, and they wouldn't keep her inpatient. Their mistake, but and there's also a civil suit against the hospital, but we all have 2020 hindsight, don't we?
And obviously, her treatment in the months beforehand has become a big part of the evidence discussed in the case. I'm curious if you could just break down how has the prosecution tried to argue that Lindsay Clancy was criminally responsible and was conscious of her actions?
They argued, first of all, that she was prescribed 13 medications, but not all at the same time. And they claim because only a few meds were missing from some of the bottles, that she wasn't following the doctor's orders when she left the hospital and that she wasn't taking her medication. They also claim that she planned the whole day. She ordered food. She sent her husband to pick up the food. She had never ordered from that particular place before. She usually ordered from places that were closer, and that she had everything planned, that she had the bedroom door locked when she went out the window so that her husband couldn't easily get into the bedroom. I believe he called the police when he ran around the front and when he saw the blood spots, and then in the backyard when he finally saw his wife and he knew what had happened, at least as far as to her. But that was mainly their argument, that she was a conniving, a planning woman who wanted to get rid of her kids and then thought she could get away with it by saying she was crazy. And by the way, I don't think it's a good argument, because if they decide she's not guilty by reason of insanity, like the second jury did in the Andrea Yates case, she's not going to walk free. She's going to be hospitalized in a place for the criminally insane in Massachusetts until the doctors say she's okay and she's free to go out. And that is taking a risk, because I don't think it would happen in this cases with 3 children, but in some cases, people wind up staying longer in a psychiatric hospital than they would in jail for the offense they committed. So it's not a get out of jail free card. You might get out of jail, but you're going into a locked institution.
I'm curious if there are any ways you think that this defense argument might fail, that, she wasn't really suffering from undiagnosed postpartum psychosis.
Is there a way that the defense's argument might fail? Sure, it might fail if they look at her prior history, if they look at the argument they're now trying to make, that she speaks perfectly normally now that she's away, now that she's in an institution. Um, Other than that, she doesn't seem to show excessive remorse for her kids, but who knows? Maybe she doesn't realize that she did something horrible. She doesn't seem to show that much remorse that she's in a wheelchair either. She's never really, as it's been reported, spoken to anybody about how she feels about that day, if she could go back. Sometimes you always see a defendant crying, if I could go back, if I could switch places, I would, if I could go back and change it. Here it's her own kids in her own body, and she hasn't done that. So yeah, I think they could say that they've certainly gotten people to say that she's sane. They're afraid if she went to an institute for the criminally insane, psychiatric treatment would help, and then she could be out there again, and who knows when she will do something similar, having another break. There's no predictor as to whether or not she would have another break, even if she's sane now. It's very hard to prove she was sane or that she wasn't insane when she did it, except by her Googling, the history on the computer, and sending the husband out, planning all her events for the day, covering herself, you could say, by getting something from CVS for her child. You say, well, why would you do that if you know you're going to kill them? Well, that's a good cover story. Everything she did was a good cover story that a rational person would follow that type of path if they believed that if they were trying to set up a defense, although they would be more likely, I think, to say that somebody robbed a house or something, to set up a cover story other than that I did it, but I was crazy when I did it.
And, I'm curious if you have any sort of predictions on what the outcome of this trial is going to be, what you think the jury might decide, and even so, just what the future looks like for both Lindsay and her family, especially her parents who have, relocated from Connecticut to Massachusetts to visit her every day at the state hospital that she's been held at.
Well, I think it's going to be not guilty by reason of insanity. There's too much doubt here. And there's too much burden on the prosecution. And if you remember with the Andrea Yates case, first she was found guilty. The Supreme Court overturned the verdict, and the second jury found her not guilty by reason of insanity.